Okay, so last time we ended here discussion on the examples of some of the earthquakes, showing yung strength nila. So moving on, yung next topic is on the effects or what dictates gaano ka-destructive yung isang earthquake. Aside from the sheer strength, yung magnitude niya, ano pa yung possible controls sa destructive power nitong earthquakes? So first, one of the most important things is yung nature ng bedrock. So kunwari, imagine yung bahay ninyo, which is situated dito sa hard igneous rock, o kaya sa sedimentary rock, o kaya sa alluvium, or even sa silt and muds. Anong environments to? Hard igneous rocks would be like here in Diliman, Quezon City, for example. If you look around you, you see adobe. So this adobe is closer to a sedimentary rock, pero it's actually igneous by nature. Pero in terms of compaction, in terms of mechanical properties, it's more like a sedimentary rock. Okay? Okay. Compared to, for example, an alluvium would be yung sediments which are not yet rocks. So ito yung parang nasa rivers, yung nakikita ninyo sa mga sa beach, for example. So this would be alluvium. So if you think about alluvium, you should just imagine kung ano yung itsura ng sediments na hindi pa bato. Okay? And then siltous mud is somewhat like alluvium. It's hindi rin siya rock. It's unconsolidated, meaning hindi pa siya solidified, and at the same time filled with water. Okay? So this things or itong silt and mud would be the ones that we see sa rivers, sa river banks, yung kunwari rivers like Pasig River, Marikina River, yung mud na nilalabas noon or yung mud na nade-deposit doon every time. For example, pag umapaw siya, you may have seen cases kapag umapaw yung ilog, yung yung pag-apaw ng ilog deposits mud dun sa paligid. So imagine, lahat actually ng surrounding areas ng ilog, most of that, at least for a few kilometers, are underlain by this unconsolidated and water-rich material. And what we see here is yung surface waves, so surface seismic waves. So ganito yung behavior ng seismic waves natin when passing through a hard igneous rock or sedimentary rock. As you can see, medyo na-maintain yung amplitude or yung wave height nitong mga seismic waves natin. But once it encounters unconsolidated material like alluvium and especially wet unconsolidated materials like silt and mud, it gets amplified tremendously. So the effect is that yung amplification nitong seismic waves brings forth more destructive power. Okay? Yeah. So if you look at, for example, as I mentioned before, yung magiging activity niyo for this topic would be hazard assessment ng area ninyo. If you look at yung hazard maps ng Marikina, for example, you'd see that it's very risky in terms of earthquakes, and precisely because of one of the reasons is this amplification. Okay? Yeah. So hindi lang amplification. So for example, kapag ka nandito ka sa solid rock, the seismic wave is generally maintained. Pero kapag nasa sediments ka lang, unconsolidated material, yung ating amplitude changes or increases. Aside from the amplitude, yung duration ng earthquake, ng vibrations is also a matter, or is also a factor sa destructive power ng earthquakes. Of course, the stronger the earthquake, generally, the longer the duration ng shaking. Okay? And the longer the shaking, mas destructive yun para sa buildings. And as we've seen before, yung nature ng material upon which the structure rests. And lastly, yung design of structure. Ang design of structure is also another important thing to consider, or important factor to consider when looking at the possible effects ng earthquakes. For example, yung most recent earthquake, yung 30 one of the things that they found to be the reason kung bakit siya laging nagpa-pancakes, if you've seen videos, yung buildings upon buildings, lagi siya nagpa-pancake, is that mahilig sila dun sa structure or yung architecture nila didn't really consider yung distribution of weight. So hindi naman lahat, pero it went unregulated, and and because of that, hindi na ayos yung engineering basically. So for example, what happened there was that, imagine nyo tong building na to, but instead of it like being like this, meron siyang additional structures sa taas. And then to support yung additional weight nun is that meron lang still, kumbaga, isang uh, isang column to support that additional weight, which obviously is not enough, wouldn't be enough kung itong weight na to is the same as yung weight na nandito sa taas. Okay? And because of that, it's one of the reasons supposedly why buildings like this easily crumbled during the 2023 earthquake. Yeah. 2022 pala na earthquake sa Turkey. Okay, so this is for example a video showing yung, play natin yung video, showing lang yung effect ng earthquake lang, ng amplitude. Lang ah. Okay. Ay, sorry. Wala pala ulit sound. Ano naman tayo sa... Wait lang ah. Share. Pati share sound. Okay. Isa pa.
Slower shearing S wave arrives with a compressive bump and rarely causes much damage. The slower shearing S wave introduces a side-to-side motion that can throw loose objects to the floor and may crack walls. The rolling surface waves are the most damaging in unconsolidated sediment. As surface waves enter the sedimentary layer, they slow down and increase in size, causing buildings to roll. If not engineered for the motion, they can crack and tumble.
Yes. Yung gustong i-highlight dito, as you've seen, is that yung amplification of waves is a problem for loose sedimentary, if yung structure is built on loose sediments. And even if well-engineered, for example, yung building, yung structure like this one, so for ito, nasira na siya, di ba? Ito, masisira na rin yan siya because of the surface waves. But if you look at this orange one, matibay siya, pero kahit na matibay siya,
Ocean, they can crack and tumble. But even a well-engineered building can sink during the shaking and liquefaction of underlying wet sediment.
So another factor is liquefaction. So liquefaction is just basically, you imagine itong wet sediments natin. So you have layers of sediments, and then filling up yung spaces in between those sediments is water or liquid, fluid. Anyway, once we shake yung sediments na to with fluid, the effect is that nako-compress yung sediments, and anything on top of it gets basically sucked into dun sa compression niya. Okay? And that is liquefaction. For example, this is another example. Yeah. So usually, aside from liquefaction, sites of liquefaction are also known to have itong mga sand boils na tinatawag. So it's, as you've seen, basically yung compression drives out any sandy material, but at the same time sucking in yung structures like this one. Okay? That may be well built to withstand earthquakes, pero since yung sediments na nasa kung saan siya nakapatong ay loose, gets liquefaction in the sediments drives this process. Okay? Aside from liquefaction, ground shaking, another dangerous effect is, or secondary effect ng earthquake is tsunamis. Itong tsunamis are more common kapag sinabi natin tsunamis, these are series of water waves caused by the displacement of a large volume of body of water, either through earthquakes or through submarine landslides. So if you have submarine landslides, the effect is the same. You generate you generate tsunami waves, right? This is different from storm surges, in which yung displacement ng water is due to the wind or whipping up basically yung waves natin. Yung tsunami is a function of displacement of water, either due to earthquake or landslide, submarine landslide. So this is how it goes. If you have an offshore fault, and that's an important matter. So usually it happens offshore faults like this one. Sorry. Yeah, so if you have an offshore fault like this one, which generates an earthquake, yeah, it displaces the water, and if you're on the coast, what you will first see, so pagbagsak ng isang part ng structure or some part ng fault, in this particular case, for example, hanging wall. So pagbagsak ng hanging wall, it sucks in water, and at the same time, so pagbagsak, yun yung retreat ng coastline, rapid retreat ng coastline, yan. And then eventually, once na parang tubig sa pool, pagbagsak na ganyan, rebound syempre yung surface waves natin, or yung water, yung waves sa dagat, and eventually it rebounds papunta sa surface, papunta sa coastline, and yun yung nakikita natin na tsunami. And yung amplification ng wave sa dagat natin, so initially yung tsunami wave natin is like this, but as it approaches yung coast natin, yan, yung kanyang wave height also drastically increases, kaya siya destructive. And just like a wave sa ocean, it sucks yung rock, yung anything that it passes through, and it can scour basically. Babawiin niya yun basically, dadali niya papunta sa dagat. So, yeah, kaya destructive yung tsunami. And usually, as you would imagine, itong tsunami wave height is most destructive for coastal communities, and at the same time, yung height ng tsunami is driven by the amount of water that is displaced, which means it's largely dependent, kung earthquake man ang cause, it's largely dependent on the strength din, on the magnitude din of earthquake. So, for example, one of the most destructive earthquakes, or if you look up most destructive tsunamis happened in the world, rather, they are the ones that are linked to magnitudes 9 and above the earthquakes. For example, yung Fukushima earthquake that generated a tsunami, that nagkaroon ng tsunami alert nun, for example, sa Philippines. Bukod sa destruction niya immediately sa east coast ng Japan, dito sa Philippines wala naman masyado naging destruction, buti na lang. Another earthquake is the 2004 magnitude 9 din yata yun na earthquake sa Banda Aceh. And yung that time, 2004, just after Christmas, yung tsunami was so destructive, it killed a lot of people in Indonesia, India, etc., Thailand. Yeah. So ito yung tsunami, for example, let's say, in this particular case, Honolulu, Hawaii naman yung example niya, yung epicenter. Most likely, itong center na to is not due to an earthquake, but rather through submarine landslide. But what it shows you is basically yung movement ng waves is just like yung movement ng waves sa puddle of water. Yeah. So it takes time to reach us, and generally, the farther you are from the epicenter of the earthquake, the less yung wave height na may experience natin. Ano ba? Ayan, ito yung sa
All
tsunami.
across northern Japan, they felt it. A violent magnitude 9.0 earthquake on March 11, 2011. It was centered about 80 miles offshore, and tsunami warnings went up immediately. In coastal cities, people knew what to do next: run to higher ground. It's from these vantage points on hills and in tall buildings that incredible footage was captured. In Kesanuma, people retreated to a high-rise rooftop and could only watch in horror as tsunami waves inundated their city, knocking buildings into rubble and mixing into a kind of tsunami soup filled with vehicles, building parts, and contents. Seawater cascaded over sea walls and into cities. This video shows the water rushing over an 18-foot seawall into Kamaishi City. The seawall here was the world's deepest and largest, but not enough for the magnitude of the March 11 disaster. It was the largest quake ever known in Japan, and one of the 5 largest recorded in the world. More than 28,000 people are confirmed dead or missing. When 2 tectonic plates push together under the sea, the resulting earthquake sends an enormous burst of energy up through the ocean, displacing enormous quantities of water. With the upward motion, a series of waves expands in all directions. In deep water, these waves travel fast, up to 500 miles an hour, but only reach a height of a few feet. A passing ship might not even notice. But as the waves enter shallow waters, friction with the ocean floor lowers the wave's speed, but raises their height. This video is from a Japan Coast Guard ship confronting a tsunami wave in shallow water on March 11. And a rare view from the air, video of a tsunami wave approaching the shoreline. In Japan, some tsunami waves reached as far as 3 miles inland. Japan may be the most seismologically studied country in the world, and with more than 1,200 high-precision GPS stations, a geophysicist at the University of Alaska used the data to create a visualization of the March 11 quake. The waves of displacement that you see were moving as fast as 5 miles per second. In this photo, the ripples of tsunami waves are seen moving upstream in the Naka River at Hitachi-Naka City. New technology left an enormous amount of visual evidence for study in years to come, and can perhaps help us.
Yeah. And another example is Palu, Indonesia, 2018. So aside from coastal communities being prone or affected, maybe affected by tsunamis, we also have to worry about landslides. So if you're from Rizal, yung pinaka malayo na kayo, of course. If you're from Rizal, malayo na kayo sa coastline, so hindi na problem if ever yung tsunami. But other problem is landslides. For example, Sichuan earthquake 2008. Yun yung pinaka naging destructive factor aside from flooding also. So mga dam areas. So if we have old dams, they may no longer withstand yung earthquakes. And once the dam is breached, yung communities sa baba ng dam or on the foothills will basically experience that drastic flooding, which is also very deadly. Yeah. Yung sinasabi ko nila sa Rizal, if you look at yung MGB hazard maps for earthquake, Rizal is actually the one that's most prone or most at risk pala, at risk kapag gumalaw yung West Valley Fault or Valley Fault system, and that is largely because of earthquakes, not really because of displacement or movement along the fault. Okay? And again, yung liquefaction and ground subsidence, as well as fires. If you have natural gas pipes or gas pipes like these ones, yeah, it may cause also fires. And also building collapse may start fires like this one in 1995 Kobe, Japan. So ito yung mga hazards na together hazards that may occur together with earthquakes, especially large magnitude earthquakes. Yeah. So we know this already. This is a distribution map of all the epicenters in the world, and as you can see, it's basically outlining yung tectonic boundaries natin. Yeah. So this is the 5 deadliest earthquakes since 1990. 2004 Sumatra. First is the Tangshan, China. 1976 earthquake, magnitude 7.6, recording up to 255,000 deaths. Yeah. Yung Sumatra earthquake, this is more recent, 2004, magnitude 9.1. It killed, the earthquake claimed 2,028 lives. Most of those are due to, or most of those deaths are due to tsunami waves inundating yung land. And then last is yung Haitian earthquake noong 2010 with 222,000 deaths. Ito naman, yung 2010 earthquake, just like the one in Turkey, it was very deadly because of the design, earthquake. Engineering design ng mga houses nila. Yeah, so yung engineering design ng houses sa Haiti wasn't able to withstand even not so large magnitude earthquake, magnitude 7 point, ano lang siya, magnitude relatively in terms of magnitude, maliit lang siya, magnitude 7, but it was still very deadly because of the structure. Okay, so yung hina-highlight nito is that hindi lang solely yung strength ng earthquake yung nagdetermine ng kanyang pagiging deadly, it's also yung engineering structure, so what we do about the risk or the hazard that is there. Okay, yan, for example, ito yung Indian Ocean earthquake nga 2004. Some incredible pictures or scary pictures. Yeah, masha-shock and awe ka na lang sa waves. Ito yung simulation showing kung paano nag-travel yung tsunami waves natin from this epicenter papunta sa basically buong Indian Ocean. And then Tohoku earthquake, and in the Philippines we have numerous trenches like this which can generate earthquakes as well, and therefore be tsunami inducing, tsunami generating. The one that is most notable in the past is yung Cotabato earthquake. It was a magnitude 8. Wala dito. Pero yeah, it was magnitude 8 and it generated a tsunami which claimed about 8,000 lives. At that time, it's a small community, so small pa lang yung population nun. So 8,000 was actually very mataas na yung in terms of percentage of deaths, 8,000 or 18,000. It claimed the lives mostly dun sa coastal communities here in southwestern Mindanao. And then yung most recent earthquakes are mostly centered dito sa north, sa yung just last year, yeah, dito sa Abra region, at the same time sa Mindoro region, Mindoro Batangas region. Yeah. And so you may be wondering, ang dami nito, Luzon ay 7.7, Mindoro 7.8, Sultan Kudarat 6.8, etc., etc. How come hindi siya ganun ka-deadly dito sa Philippines? It's mostly due to the building code din na in-employ ng Philippines ever since nagkaroon ng or passed into law yung building code, which basically sets up guidelines na yung buildings natin, yung houses, even houses, should be able to withstand a certain magnitude. Yeah. So, of course, a law is different from, I mean, passing a law is different from enacting the law. So you should check with your contractors, yung gumawa ng bahay ninyo, kung finalo nila yung building code. Kung may mga cracks na yung building niyo, you should have it checked then. Again, yung highlight niya nito ay hindi lang factor yung layo mo sa earthquake, also yung underlying material, kung saan built yung bahay ninyo, and at the same time, yung structure mismo ng bahay ninyo. Those are factors which could affect or which could dictate kung gaano ka-deadly yung isang earthquake. And as we've shown before, these are basically the Philippines is riddled with active faults, some of which are not yet mapped. For example, yung most recent earthquake sa Visayas region, for example, yung North Bohol Fault, yung sa Cebu na earthquake, yung sa Negros na earthquake, just within the last 2 decades, yung mga earthquakes na yan, as you can see here, hindi pa sila reflected in the 2000 map ng PHIVOX. So ganun pa developing basically yung earthquake research sa Philippines, yung identification ng active faults sa Philippines. Hindi pa siya well developed. Itong sa Mindanao, for example, mukhang walang faults, pero we never know. We've seen a lot of faults, for example, dito sa Agusan area in the recent, within the last 2 decades then. So that's an indication na meron most likely faults din dito, hindi lang properly recognized pa. Okay? If there is an earthquake, PHIVOX regularly publishes information regarding the epicenter, kung saan located yung earthquake, ano yung magnitude niya, and ano yung type niya. Is it tectonic, volcanic in origin? Yeah. So it also gives yung intensity, so that yung naging intensity ng earthquake, which tells us kung gaano ka-destructive siya. If its intensity 5 like this, then it must have been quite destructive na. May shaking na nagaganap. I mean, intense na yung shaking na nagaganap. Pwede na fractures yung ibang areas, ibang bahay sa areas na affected. So yung mga tao nandito should have those structures checked, for example. So itong mga information na to is available sa PHIVOX website every time magkaka-earthquake na relatively large magnitude, or at the same time sa Facebook page nila and sa Twitter, they actively post this information. So active faults are the ones that were identified to have moved within the last 10,000 years, or to have shown activity within the last 10,000 years. These are some photos of some active faults sa Philippines. Yan, ito may pinakita ko yung Digdig Fault in Nueva Ecija, 1990 earthquake. Yeah, it displays, as we can see from these rice paddies, the Philippine fault is a left lateral fault. Yeah. And yung favorite ng media, yung big one, we're still, hindi naman tayo we're waiting, pero we are preparing for a possible large magnitude earthquake within the Metro Manila area, which may turn out deadly just because of the population density sa Metro Manila. And yeah, so yung fault which may move based sa recurrence interval, itong fault na to ay possibly basically ripe na for moving in terms of recurrence interval, or every how many years it moves based on historical records, based on historical and past records rather. When we know na itong West Valley Fault is already prime for movement. Yeah, so ito yung trace ng West Valley Fault. It is also available sa websites ng PHIVOX. So you can check out kung gaano kalayo, kalapit from the earthquake. Yeah. You can start actually your activity by looking up this website, Hazard Hunter PH. Search nyo na siya sa Google, lalabas naman yun siya agad. Ano yan siya? Powered by the maps from PHIVOX, MGB, Mines and Geosciences Bureau, and all the hazard maps that we have. Okay? So it already gives you an idea kung gaano kakalayo sa fault, ano yung risk mo from flooding, from landslides, etc., etc. So you can start yung activity natin on hazard assessment ng area ninyo using yung Hazard Hunter PH. Okay? So ito yung sa West Valley Fault and magnitude 7.2 earthquake. Sabi, generates this amount of energy, which is basically similar to this amount of uh, Hiroshima bombs o kaya TNTs. This is in terms of energy, of course. In terms of destructive power, yung movements niya, yun yung movement ng fault, landslides that it can bring, yung pinangangambahan natin. For example, if you look at here, it runs basically through a dam. So if ma-breach tong dam na to because of an earthquake, large magnitude earthquake, then the water from that reservoir can start rushing in. And as we've seen in the past, it can be very deadly, yung sudden flooding na yan. Yeah, so Valley Fault System, from Marikina Quadrangle, UP Diliman, Loyola Heights is here, La Vista is here, Loyola Heights. So UP Diliman is just north of this. Dito lang yun siya. Ito na yun siya actually. Ito yung CP Garcia. Yun yung CP Garcia. So ito na yung Diliman. Relatively malapit tayo sa West Valley Fault or Valley Fault System. And again, all these maps are available already for public consumption sa PBOX website and also Hazard Hunter PH. Journalis na nila. So if you're looking at hazards sa area ninyo, then you should check this. Even if hindi kayo dito nakatira, hindi kayo dito, hindi Manila yung permanent address ninyo, since dito kayo nag-aral and most likely naka-dorm kayo or naka-house kayo somewhere dito sa Philippines, so you should, dito sa Metro Manila rather, you should see this trace of fault. You should consider this trace of fault sa hazard assessment. So, for faults, kung faults lang yung distance from the fault lang yung tinitingnan, you can look up yung fault finder.pbox.dost.gov.ph. Yeah, it will give you the distance from the active fault. It's also integrated into nga sa Hazard Hunter PH. Yeah, ito yung earthquake risk map ng Metro Manila. Of course, yung Marikina, yung main problem, and Pasig, yung main problem dito is since these are loose sediments, these areas are underlain by loose sediments. So yun yung pinaka risk para sa areas or hazard para sa areas na to. Yung ground shaking can induce severe liquefaction, and at the same time amplification ng waves can destroy more homes, can lead to more destructive waves. Ayan. And ganun din yung sa Manila area. Relatively, yung Quezon City, Makati, Mandaluyong areas is underlain by relatively solidified adobe. So adobe is pyroclastic rock. So consolidated pyroclastic rock, medyo matigas siya na bato. So yeah, kaya relatively low risk or very low risk category itong areas na to. Yeah. Ano pa ba? Yan. Last na, can we really predict earthquakes? The answer is no. Based on seismicity patterns, so based on previous earthquakes or timing of previous earthquakes, based on sudden activities in a fault na hindi naman gumagalaw for a long time, which we call foreshocks, that can be an indicator of or that can be used as predictive parameters for earthquakes. Pero hindi yun siya foolproof way and hindi yun siya tomorrow magkaka-earthquake o kaya a few years from now, exactly 2025 for example, magkaka-earthquake sa area na to. Doesn't work that way. Aside from that, we can also use radon emissions. Mamaya i-explain electromagnetic precursors. To a certain extent, animal behavior has been observed to be erratic kapag mayroong large magnitude earthquake or just before large magnitude earthquakes, fractoluminescence, as well as satellite observations. So for example, ito yung earthquake or seismic. Ito yung record ng seismicity sa Tohoku area before the 2011 earthquakes. You can see that days before, suddenly nagkaroon ng large magnitude earthquake, so magnitude 7.2, and actually at that time, you would think na ito na yung main event, but then a few days after, nagkaroon ng main shock, and we only identify this as a main shock kasi it's much higher than the aftershock, 9.2. Yeah, so since meron ka main shock currently, so uh, yung vision natin is of course pag backwards 2020, yung foreshock, itong magnitude 7.2 which happened around March 9 is apparently a foreshock. Yeah. So anyway, yung seismicity patterns, usually yung parameters na tinitignan is saang areas yung nako-compress basically kasi 'di ba based sa elastic rebound theory, yung areas that gets compressed is the area that is most prone to movement, next movement. At the same time, or hindi naman compressed, yung area that is most experiencing stress. Okay? Whether it be compressional, tensional, or shear stress. Okay? Also, yung based sa historical records and geologic records, kailan yung last earthquakes ito ng area, every how many years nagkakaroon ng earthquake sa area na yon. Usually, hindi to yung time scale is within decades or centuries. So every 500 to 700 years, ganun yung timeline na tinitingnan natin. Yun yung sinasabi nating recurrence interval. Hindi to every 55 years and therefore after 55 years, sure tayo na magkaka-earthquake. Hindi siya ganun ka detailed or hindi ganun ka specific yung periodicity na measure natin. Okay? But anyway, the seismicity patterns is the main tool for identifying saan posibleng magkaroon ng next earthquake. Posible, laging may seismic gaps, for example, yan. Basically, they may tell us areas which haven't released their stress. Basically, yung strain is still building up. So, based sa elastic rebound theory, these areas may be the ones that are prone to releasing ng stress. Okay? So we call that seismic gaps. And once na nagkaroon na ng small movements sa rocks, precursor to a main shock. So before main shock, parang nag-start na mag-break yung bato natin, little by little, that can be very small in terms of movement such that hindi siya ma-detect. Pero as soon as you have breaking of rocks, radon gas can start being emitted, can be emitted little by little. So yung radon emissions can also be used as a marker ng or precursor marker ng isang earthquake. So for example, if you look at this map, if you look at this chart, this is the Yogo Nanbu earthquake in 1995. Days before that or weeks before that, nagkaroon ng sudden spike in radon emissions. Yeah. So yung radon natin, it's basically from the Earth's crust, and yung rocks natin with radon, initially housing them. Pag nag-move na yung rocks natin, it can release yung radon gas, and those small movements can result this sudden pickup in radon. Hindi rin siya foolproof way of indicating na, okay, every time na may radon emission, magkakaroon ng earthquake. Hindi yun siya ganun palagi. Okay? Can be a precursor. And then, of course, the same concept, electromagnetic activity and fractoluminescence. Some rocks, if you rub them together, they generate light, kaya siya fractoluminescence. And same concept as yung radon emissions, pag nag-start ka pungguan or mag-crack yung mga rocks natin, some of them can start producing light, fractoluminescence. If you have a sensor for that, then you can it may indicate precursor basically ng large magnitude earthquake. To a certain extent, animal behavior, for example, prior to the 2008 Sichuan earthquake in China, yan, supposedly nagkaroon ng large frog migration. Ganon din supposedly nung prior to the 2004 Banda Aceh earthquake, nagkaroon ng ant and spider migration towards higher elevation. and that is also attributed to days after nagkaroon ng large magnitude earthquake. Yan. And then of course, satellite observations, although yung natural limit nitong satellite observations is that the wavelength is usually tens of centimeters at best. At best na yun. So any small movement that is smaller than tens of centimeters may not be detected. Okay? Yan. But post movement, it can give us a lot of idea kung saan nag-build up yung stress after the earthquake and can therefore generate the next one. Okay? Radars like this, satellites like this, nanosatellites like this, for example. Yeah. Yeah, so that's it for earthquakes. The next lecture is on what to do before, during, and after an earthquake. It's from Pbox. I'll just upload the file. Ano lang naman siya, very self-explanatory. Please read up on that. Parang material niyo yun para reviewin kung ano yung dapat gawin before, during, and after an earthquake. Before would be things like you can do now. Okay. Okay.